I will be presenting on the beaded high tops by Teri Greeves. The beaded high tops is a piece of art. It is a pair of high-top shoes that are child-size all-star Converse. Teri puts her own artwork on the shoe through beadwork. She does this by starting with the drawing and then simplifying it by splitting the drawing into lines. After that, she applies the drawing to the shoe that she is working on. She then stitches rows of colorful beads onto the shoe till the whole piece eventually comes together. Oftentimes, natives will do beadwork on moccasins and other animal hide. However, Teri does this beadwork on more contemporary shoes, like tennis shoes or high heels. These shoes are worn more often by other people nowadays compared to the moccasins. About the artist. The artist is Teri Greeves. She is from Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma. However, she was born in 1970 in the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. She got a bachelor's in American Studies from the University of California, Santa Cruz. She started beadwork when she was 8 years old, and her mother owned a trading post. At 8 years old, a Lakota artist brought a pair of beaded tennis shoes into her mother's trading post, and Teri fell in love with them. When Teri was in college, her mother called her and asked her to bead a pair of high-top shoes. She thought it would be a lot of work, but did it anyways and continues to do it now. She chooses to do the beadwork on a high-top shoe to show the adaptability and ingenuity of Native artists, and it is a way of her to tell her stories in her own and unique way. The significance and history of the beaded high tops. Glass beads were first introduced to American Indians by European traders. Teri says that once natives first started using these beads, they turned it into something very native and Kiowa. In the past and even today, many natives do this beadwork on moccasins. However, Teri takes this style of work and does beadwork on more contemporary shoes, like tennis shoes or high heels. Teri oftentimes beads adult shoes. However, these beaded high tops were for children because one of her goals is to educate and celebrate her children. The context of the beaded high tops. The form or shape of the artwork is that it's a beadwork on a pair of child-size all-star Converse, which is a high-top shoe. The color is a dark blue, light blue, gold, red, purple, and white. However, it mainly just uses the gold and the different shades of blue. The materials it uses is the beads to sew into the shoe, the actual shoe that the beads go on, and the sewing materials needed to put the beads on the shoe. The imagery with it is that it has high tops have combined a diamond-shaped pattern and the beads to make a pattern of stylized horses. The shoes also had horseshoes detailed on the heels of them. The language that this piece uses is that she communicates what it means to be a Native person in the present day. In addition, she is telling the stories of the first beadworkers and her ancestors through her own beadwork. However, there is not as much language, but it's more of the sound. Teri added dangling attachments on the heels of the shoe as a jingle and added a sound element. These cones are made from tins and tassels connected to it. These jingles are often seen on native pouches or moccasins. The symbol with the piece is that the horse and horseshoes are shown as traditional and native culture in riding horses. The tassels show tradition with the jingles and original ways of making moccasins. The bright colors are traditional colors, and the high-top shoes are showing contemporary beadwork on the footwear. Also, the child-sized shoes show the importance of her children. The function of this piece. This piece shows traditional type of beadwork with traditional materials, like bright colored beads and sewing styles on footwear. However, Teri switches out the traditional moccasins for different, more contemporary shoes, like tennis shoes, high heels, or high tops. This shows how Teri is bringing the traditional culture to the contemporary culture of Native Americans and showing the world how real Indians live and are not just a traditional stereotypical Indian. The impact on the audience. This art style impacts the audience a lot by showing them how real Indians live and how they are not stereotypical and traditional Indian. I personally viewed it as a new way of art and that I have never really thought about before. Teri took an everyday item like shoes and made them into her own artwork with her beadwork. Teri states, in America, across the planet, you've either owned a pair of these, your kids have owned a pair of these, you played basketball in these, you had good times in them, you did your own little graffiti on them, you've worn them out. They are familiar, and this familiar object is a perfect vehicle for me to tell a story with. Having this familiarity with the object puts more of an impact on how you can view it, and the artwork that it puts on it feels more like the person's identity in their story. One of the major themes is colonialism. Colonialism is the control of one power over other people by separation. Teri Greeves used original glass beads which were given to the Native Americans by European traders and was introduced to the original beadwork through colonialism. She made the art in her own way, but it stemmed from the traditional colonialism and the Europeans. This shows how Teri Greeves' work originated from colonialism but goes against it by turning the art into her own work. Another major theme is cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is the unacknowledged taking of one's cultural practice, customs, and more by another more dominant culture. Teri Greeves' art takes the traditional beadwork of the Indians along with the traditional colors and styles and puts it on contemporary shoes. Teri takes the traditional Indian culture and puts it onto more contemporary European footwear, which is taking the cultural practice of the Indians and adding it to items from a more dominant culture. In addition, stereotypes is another major theme. Stereotypes is a widely held belief of an oversimplified image or idea of a person or thing. Teri takes the stereotypical bright colors and beadwork of Native Americans. It also takes a stereotypical design with the animals. Because of the stereotypical ideas that Indians are one with nature, animals, and Indians oftentimes wear bright colors and does beadwork. Each of these parts of Teri's artwork is part of the stereotypes. Furthermore, identity is another major theme. Identity is the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. The artwork shows Teri's own ideas through the beadwork on contemporary shoes, like tennis shoes and high heels. She expresses herself through the beadwork and each individual design she puts into the shoes. By designing and coloring the shoes along with putting them together, she expresses herself and her creativity fully throughout the artwork. Because she can express herself and her ideas into the artwork, she can express her individual identity in the overall art piece. Additionally, resistance is another major theme. Resistance is the refusal to accept or comply with something. Teri uses her artwork and shows off the real Indian and not just the stereotypical and traditional Indian, and how the Indians are changing with time and are not going extinct. Because the artwork is going against her traditional and stereotypical Indian and showing part of the contemporary Indian, it is going against and resisting the main concept of how they are viewed. The final major theme is survivance. Survivance is the survival of American Indian studies and stories. Teri's art shows the traditional ways of Indians through the beadwork, colors, and designs. This shows how the traditions of the American Indians are still around, along with their studies and stories. Teri is helping pass those stories and traditions down through her art and how she makes each individual piece.